My name is Kathy. As I sit at my kitchen table, I often find my gaze drifting to an old, unassuming envelope resting on the corner. It was tucked between a water bill and a grocery store flyer, looking so ordinary that it could have easily been tossed away. But that one fateful Tuesday, it changed everything for me. I remember the moment I first held that letter. The handwriting was painstakingly neat, as if the writer had practiced each stroke before putting pen to paper. I recognized the last name right away, Miller, my birth name, the one I hadn't heard in over 2 decades. I was 11 months old when my birth parents signed the papers and handed me over to strangers. I'd spent the past 20 years building a life where I didn't need to explain my origins. I had wonderful adoptive parents. My dad, Tom, was a kind-hearted mechanic. He taught me how to change a tire in our backyard when I was just a teenager. My mom, Lisa, was a schoolteacher. She was there at every parent-teacher meeting, and she cried tears of joy when I graduated from high school. They were the only parents I'd ever needed, and I'd told myself that so many times it almost felt like the absolute truth. I sat down at the kitchen table before opening the letter. My hands were steady, which surprised me because my heart was pounding in my chest. The letter was short, just 3 paragraphs. My birth mother, Sarah, wrote as if she was afraid of taking up too much of my time. She said she'd thought about reaching out for years but never had the courage. She mentioned that my birth father, David, was in poor health and wanted to make amends before it was too late. But then, in the last paragraph, the real reason came out. I had a brother, Jake, 25 years old, who'd been accepted into a prestigious medical program overseas. Tuition, housing, and travel expenses added up to just under $50,000. I read the letter 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I kept waiting for an apology, for a single sentence asking about my life instead of my bank account. It never came. I called my mom, Lisa. I needed to hear a voice that made sense. She listened without interrupting, just like she always did. When I finished reading the letter to her over the phone, there was a long silence. Then she said, "Kathy, some people only remember they have a daughter when they need one." Those words stuck with me long after we hung up. I didn't respond to the letter right away. Instead, I did something perhaps I shouldn't have. I looked them up on social media. Sarah Miller had a simple online presence, mostly pictures of her flower garden and her cat. Jake, on the other hand, had a life full of luxury. There were photos of him on a yacht in the Caribbean, posing next to a brand new sports car with a caption about achieving his dreams. There wasn't a single photo of me anywhere. It was as if I'd never been a part of that family. It was like I'd been completely edited out of their story, except now, they needed me for money. I thought about the life I could have had if I'd been born a boy. I imagined family dinners around a big table, birthdays filled with presents and laughter, and a childhood spent in a warm, loving home instead of being shuffled through the foster care system. I wasn't given up because of poverty or hardship. I was given up because when the doctor said girl, it wasn't the answer they wanted. A week later, a second letter arrived. It came with photographs. Sarah was standing in front of a nice suburban house I didn't recognize, beside a man I assumed was David. They were smiling, but the smiles seemed forced. Jake stood between them, looking tall and confident in a designer suit. On the back of the photo, in that same careful handwriting, it said, "This is your family. We hope you'll consider being part of it again." I set the photo down on the table and stared at it until the kitchen light became too bright. 20 years of silence, broken not by love or guilt, but by tuition fees. At that moment, I felt a sense of clarity. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and it had nothing to do with the $50,000 they were asking for. For 3 weeks, I didn't write back. Instead, I used my skills as a financial analyst to dig deeper. I started with public records. 2 years ago, Sarah and David had taken out a large loan to start a coffee shop. Local reviews showed that the business was struggling. David's health claims, which were so urgently mentioned in the first letter, didn't match any verifiable records. There were no hospital fundraisers, no community support pages, just a vague statement about his poor health. Jake's acceptance into the medical program was real. I found the university listing myself. But the tuition estimate they'd given me was almost double what the program actually cost. By the time I finished my research, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires hope that things could have been different. Instead, I felt a cold understanding. This wasn't a family reaching out for reconciliation, it was a family trying to get back a resource they'd once discarded. I wrote a letter back. I made sure it said exactly what I wanted. I told them I remembered nothing of them because there was nothing to remember, just the absence of their love. I told them that when I was 18, my adoptive parents had told me the truth about why I'd been given up. No achievement in my life since then had changed the fact that I wasn't the son they wanted. I said I understood their financial pressures, but I wouldn't fund a future for a family that had never invested in mine. And I decided I was closing the door, not out of meanness, but because a one-sided door can't stay open forever. I mailed the letter on a Friday. I didn't expect a response, and for 2 weeks there was none. Then a third envelope arrived, thicker than the others. Inside was a long letter from Sarah. For the first time, it sounded more like a confession than a request. She said she thought about me every year on my birthday. She claimed that giving me up had been David's decision, pressured by his own parents. She went along with it because she was young and scared and didn't know how to stand up to him. She said she understood if I never forgave her, but the shame had never left her, whether it was about the tuition or not. I read the letter at the same kitchen table where I'd opened the first one. I believed some of it, but not all. Grief and guilt can look so similar, especially after 20 years and just a few letters. But there was something in her words that hit differently than Jake's luxury photos. I decided I could hold two truths at once. Maybe she genuinely regretted what happened, but the fact remained that they'd only reached out when they needed money. I wrote back one last time. I set boundaries. I told Sarah that if she wanted a relationship with me, it had to be free of financial expectations. It would have to be built slowly, on its own terms, without the urgency of a tuition deadline. I said Jake and I were strangers, and just because we shared blood didn't mean we had to take on each other's obligations. I told her I was open to getting to know her cautiously, but the version of family that relied on my bank account would never include me. She wrote back within days, agreeing without any arguments or guilt tripping. I couldn't be sure if her response was sincere or just strategic. But I decided I didn't need to be certain right away. Trust, if it was ever going to exist, would have to be earned little by little, the way it should have been from the very start, before a doctor's words decided my worth in a family that never gave me a chance to prove myself. That first envelope taught me a hard-learned lesson. Family isn't defined by the names on a birth certificate. It's defined by those who show up when there's nothing to gain. My adoptive parents have been there for me every single day, asking for nothing in return. That's the only family that truly matters, and that's the family I choose, every time, envelope or not. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over those who only remember you when they need something, hit the subscribe button and stay with this channel. There are more real stories and choices to come, and I'd love for you to be a part of it.